The base was never quiet. Even in the dead of night, when operations slowed and the desert heat finally bled into the sand, there was always noise. The hum of generators, boots crunching gravel, distant helicopters chopping through the sky. But in the weapons room, one corner always seemed to have its own silence. That silence belonged to her. She wasn't the loud one. She wasn't the soldier telling war stories, laughing with the unit, or bragging about who could drink the most after deployment. She wasn't even someone most would notice in passing. If anything, she blended into the background, like another piece of the equipment stacked neatly along the walls. Yet those who looked closer really looked, could see that there was something different about her. She had a discipline that went beyond duty. When others dropped their rifles at the end of a long patrol, she picked them up, field-stripped them, and worked until the grease stains marked her hands and her fingertips smelled of oil. It wasn't just habit. It was ritual. She cleaned each weapon with the kind of attention one might give to a living thing. Her hands moved with precision, every movement deliberate. The metal whispered under her cloth. Clicks of pins and bolts sliding back into place sounded like music. Some soldiers joked about it, calling her the janitor of steel or the weapon whisperer. Others ignored her altogether. But the ones who paid attention noticed something strange. She didn't just clean. She studied. Every rifle was memorized by her touch. She knew which trigger pull felt gritty, which barrel needed extra brushing, which scope had been knocked a degree off alignment. Weapons that passed through her hands seemed sharper afterward, deadlier, as if they carried her focus within their steel. Most people assumed she was just obsessive, someone who needed order to survive in a place built on chaos. But the Special Forces sniper noticed something else. He first saw her one evening after returning from a long-range patrol. Dust clung to his fatigues, and his body ached from days in the field. As he entered the weapons room, he caught sight of her, sitting in her usual corner. She had a dismantled M201, an enhanced sniper rifle, laid out before her, each part aligned in meticulous order. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't even acknowledging the world around her. Her eyes moved slowly over the weapon, her fingers gliding across the stock as if tracing hidden stories carved into it. The sniper froze, his own rifle slung across his shoulder. He had spent years with weapons, had seen men strip and clean them in record time, had seen carelessness, had seen perfection. But what she was doing wasn't just maintenance. It was communion. Most soldiers cleaned rifles because they had to. She cleaned because she wanted to. And not a single movement was wasted. He leaned against the doorway and watched as she worked the bolt, checked the firing pin, and brushed the barrel with steady, unhurried strokes. Her breathing never changed. No sighs, no huffs of irritation. Only patience. Strange, he muttered to himself, though quietly enough that no one else heard. She didn't notice him then, or maybe she pretended not to. Her focus was absolute. For nearly 20 minutes, he stood there, arms folded, watching her work as though she had all the time in the world. When she finally reassembled the rifle and laid it on the table, gleaming under the dim light, she paused. Her hand rested on the weapon's grip, like a final act of reassurance. Then, without a word, she reached for the next piece of equipment. The sniper walked away that night, unsettled by a question that gnawed at him. Who is she, really? Her reputation, if she had one, was built on silence. Others filled the air with chatter, but she let silence do her speaking. Some interpreted it as coldness. Others thought it was arrogance. In truth, it was neither. She simply didn't waste words where actions could speak louder. There was something unshakable about her calm. Even in the mess hall, where laughter roared and arguments sometimes sparked into shouting matches, she sat with quiet composure, eating slowly, listening more than talking. Her eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to catalog everything, from the twitch of a soldier's hand to the weight of their exhaustion. But it was in the weapons room where her essence truly revealed itself. That space, crowded with racks of rifles, machine guns, pistols, and crates of ammunition, was alive with the energy of war. And she, silent, meticulous, was its guardian. Soldiers often underestimated her. Some assumed she lacked combat experience. Others dismissed her as just another support figure. Few knew her past. Fewer cared to ask. Yet, when rifles came back jammed or optics misaligned, it was her hands they trusted to put them right. The sniper, however, was not like the others. He couldn't ignore the discipline she carried in her silence. One evening, after a particularly grueling operation, he brought his own rifle in dirty, battered, and worn from the desert wind. He expected her to clean it without comment, as always. But that night, she did something different. She looked at him. Not for long, just a second or two. But her eyes met his, steady and unblinking, before returning to the weapon in her hands. It was enough. Enough for him to sense that beneath her quiet was something more than duty. There was confidence there, even strength. She wasn't just a shadow in the background. She was someone waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The sniper found himself intrigued. Outside, the base carried on with its usual rhythm. Trucks rumbled through gates, soldiers shouted across the yard, radios buzzed with coded chatter. But inside that corner of the weapons room, the silence deepened. She worked late into the night, sometimes alone, sometimes surrounded by others who barely noticed her presence. Hours slipped away like grains of sand through a clenched fist. What drove her? No one knew. Perhaps it was routine, perhaps discipline, perhaps something more personal. Some guessed she had lost people, and that her obsession with weapons was her way of controlling fate. Others thought she simply had no life beyond the military. But the sniper was beginning to wonder if the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She wasn't cleaning weapons because it was her duty. She was preparing. And though he didn't yet know what for, he couldn't shake the feeling that when the time came, the world would find out exactly who she was. Her presence grew into an unspoken challenge for those who noticed. If she could dedicate herself so fully to something as repetitive as cleaning, what could she do when tested in the field? What hidden abilities lay behind those patient hands and quiet eyes? The sniper, more than anyone, wanted to know the answer. For now, she remained in her corner, silent, steady, and unbothered by the chaos around her. But the day was coming when her silence would be broken, not with words, but with a single world-defying shot. And the sniper, though he didn't yet realize it, would be the one to ask the question that unlocked her legend. The weapons room smelled faintly of gun oil and steel, the kind of scent that clung to every soldier's skin after long hours of work. The late afternoon sun streamed in through narrow windows, painting lines of gold across the tables, where rifles lay disassembled in careful rows. The usual chatter of soldiers filled the space banter, arguments, and the kind of laughter born from exhaustion rather than joy. But in the far corner, she was where she always was, quiet, methodical, lost in the rhythm of her work. She was wiping down the barrel of a precision rifle, her eyes half closed in concentration, when the sniper approached. Unlike the others, he didn't crowd her space or throw careless words her way. He simply stood a few feet back, watching her the way he had done many times before, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Her silence had fascinated him for weeks. She never sought attention, never boasted, never tried to prove anything to anyone. Yet everything she did, every motion of her hands, every pause of her breath radiated control. She reminded him of the calm before a storm, that unnerving stillness that always seemed to conceal something powerful beneath it. This time, however, he decided not to remain a silent observer. "Tell me something," he said at last. His voice cut through the chatter around them, low but commanding enough to draw curious glances. She didn't react at first, continuing to run her cloth down the barrel's interior with slow precision. It wasn't until she placed the rifle carefully back on the table that she raised her eyes to meet his. There was no surprise in her gaze. If anything, there was a quiet question there, an acknowledgement that she knew he wouldn't have spoken unless it mattered. The sniper leaned in slightly, his voice dropping so that only those nearest could hear. "Do you think you could make a 3,320-meter shot?" The room stilled. Conversations broke off. Tools clinked against tables as soldiers paused mid-task, their curiosity piqued. It wasn't just the question, it was the audacity of it. That distance wasn't just long. It bordered on the edge of impossibility. Even among elite snipers, it was a shot whispered about in legend, attempted only under extraordinary circumstances. A few soldiers chuckled, shaking their heads. Someone muttered, "Hell, I couldn't even see that far without a scope." Another whispered, "What's he asking her for?" But she didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes or dismiss the question as a joke. Instead, she set the cloth down with deliberate calm and looked at the sniper with the same stillness she carried in all things. Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "If the rifle can handle it," she said quietly, "then so can I." The words hit the room like a suppressed explosion. Soldiers exchanged incredulous glances. Some smirked, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others scoffed openly, muttering about arrogance. But just a few looked at her differently. They saw not bravado, but certainty. The sniper's eyes narrowed, studying her face. He had expected hesitation, maybe even laughter. Instead, what he found was conviction, quiet, unshakable conviction. "Do you even know what that shot means?" He pressed. "At that distance, gravity will drag the bullet down like an anchor. The wind will tear it sideways. Even the spin of the earth will throw it off course. It's not about pulling a trigger, it's about beating physics itself." She didn't flinch. "Then I'll beat it." For a moment, silence reigned. Then, like a dam breaking, the room filled with whispers. Some laughed louder now, convinced she was out of her depth. Others leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. The sniper, however, wasn't laughing. He tilted his head, his gaze still fixed on her, as though trying to peel back the layers of her calm. He had spent years honing his craft, studying every element that separated a good shot from a legendary one. And yet, something in her eyes unsettled him. She wasn't boasting, and she wasn't naive. She believed it truly believed it. And belief, he knew, was dangerous. "All right," he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise around them. "Then prove it." A hush fell again. Soldiers straightened in their seats, sensing that something extraordinary was taking shape before them. Her answer came without hesitation. "When?" The sniper's lips curved into the faintest grin. "Tomorrow. At dawn." The rest of the evening carried an unusual energy. Word spread quickly through the base that the quiet woman had accepted a challenge no sane shooter would take. Around dinner tables, in bunks, and in hushed conversations outside the barracks, the story grew with every telling. Some mocked her, calling her foolish. Others were secretly rooting for her, eager to see whether she could silence the skeptics. She, however, remained unchanged. She ate in silence, her movements slow and deliberate, as if the challenge meant nothing more than another day's work. Inside, though, something stirred. It wasn't fear, nor pride, it was a sense of inevitability. She had always prepared, always trained herself in silence, waiting for something she couldn't yet name. Now the moment had come. The sniper watched her that evening from across the mess hall. His comrades teased him, asking if he was serious about letting her try. "She's no sniper," one said, shaking his head. "She's good with cleaning rods, sure, but 3 kilometers? That's suicide for a bullet." The sniper didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. But there was something in her stillness that had hooked him, something that told him she wasn't a joke. He wanted to see for himself whether that calm was hollow or whether it hid a precision that could make history. Later that night, she returned to the weapons room alone. The world outside was dark, the desert winds howling faintly beyond the walls. She sat at her usual corner, the tools laid out before her, but she didn't reach for them right away. Instead, she stared at the disassembled rifle resting on the table. Her fingers hovered over it, tracing the cold steel as if drawing strength from it. She thought of the sniper's challenge, of the distance that seemed impossible. But fear never came. For her, the shot wasn't about numbers or odds. It was about control. Control over her breath, her heartbeat, her will. She closed her eyes and imagined it, the target glimmering far away, the rifle steady in her hands, the silence stretching between the squeeze of the trigger and the strike of the bullet. She imagined the impossible made real. When she finally opened her eyes, they were sharp, clear, and resolute. She picked up the first piece of the rifle and began cleaning, her motions deliberate and unhurried. Tomorrow, at dawn, she would show them. And when she did, silence would no longer define her. It would crown her. The desert night passed slowly, filled with the distant hum of aircraft and the restless shuffling of soldiers trying to sleep. But for her, there was no tossing or turning, no restless thoughts gnawing away. She lay in her bunk with her eyes closed, her breathing steady, her body still. Tomorrow at dawn, she would attempt something most believed was impossible. Yet, she felt no fear. What she carried wasn't dread, it was weight. The weight of expectation. The weight of disbelief. The weight of silence finally cracking open. By sunrise, the base was alive with unusual energy. Soldiers who would normally drag themselves out of bed were already awake, whispering about the challenge. Some carried mugs of steaming coffee, others leaned against walls or sat cross-legged in the dirt. They were waiting not for orders, not for drills, but for her. She walked across the compound with her usual calm. Her boots crunched softly on gravel, and though dozens of eyes followed her, she didn't flinch. Her hands were steady, her stride measured. To the onlookers, she looked almost detached, as though the pressure that gripped them like a fist didn't touch her at all. The sniper was already waiting at the range, a rifle laid out on a sandbagged position. It wasn't an ordinary rifle, it was a custom-modified .338 Lapua Magnum, a weapon designed for distance, precision, and punishing accuracy. Even then, 3,320 meters was beyond what most would dare to try. As she approached, the sniper lifted his gaze to her. There was no smile, no hint of mockery, only a quiet intensity. He had tested countless men, trained with the best shooters, and carried the memory of more failed shots than he cared to count. And yet, there was something about this moment that unsettled him. "You know what you're about to try, right?" he asked, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. She paused, then nodded. "Yes." He studied her face, looking for cracks, nervousness, hesitation, pride. But all he found was stillness. "All right then," he muttered, half to himself. "Let's see if you're as calm behind a trigger as you are behind a cleaning rod." The soldiers gathered in a loose semicircle behind them, whispering and betting quietly among themselves. Some predicted failure in seconds. She won't even hit dirt within 100 meters of the target. Others whispered more cautiously. What if she does it? What if she actually makes it? The sniper ignored them. He crouched beside the rifle, running a final check. Scope alignment, bipod stability, bolt smoothness, all in order. He patted the rifle, like one might pat a horse before a race. "This isn't just about pulling a trigger," he said, his voice sharper now, more like a teacher than a challenger. "At this range, the bullet will drop nearly 60 meters before it gets there. The wind could carry it meters off course. Even the Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, will shift it. You'll need more than steady hands." She knelt beside him, her eyes on the rifle. "Then teach me." The sniper blinked, caught off guard. He had expected arrogance, or at least stubbornness. Instead, she had given him respect. "Teach you?" He repeated. "Yes," she said simply. "If you want me to prove it, then show me what I need to do." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Soldiers leaned in, intrigued. Was she admitting weakness? No, her tone wasn't defeatist. It was practical, grounded. The sniper studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right. But don't mistake this. This isn't training. This is survival science. If you want to hit that target, every variable must bend to your will." The lesson began immediately. He showed her how to read the mirage lines in the distance, the shimmering waves of heat rising from the ground. "That's the wind talking," he explained. "Learn to listen. If you ignore it, it'll lie to you." He placed a small anemometer in her hand, letting her feel the tug of the breeze as numbers flickered across its screen. Then he took it back. "But gadgets fail. Trust your eyes, your skin, the way dust lifts from the earth." She listened intently, her silence now working in her favor. Where others might interrupt, argue, or boast, she absorbed every word. Her head tilted slightly as he explained bullet trajectory, how a round fired at such a distance would arc like a thrown stone. "Think of it like this," he said, drawing a rough sketch in the dirt with a stick. "You're not shooting at the target. You're shooting into the sky, into the future, and letting the bullet fall into the target's path. If you can't imagine that arc in your head, you'll miss." She stared at the crude drawing, her expression unreadable. Then she said softly, "So the shot is a conversation. Between me, the rifle, the wind, and the earth." The sniper stopped, staring at her. Few students of his had ever grasped it so quickly, let alone spoken it aloud. He gave a small, approving nod. "Exactly." By midday, she was prone behind the rifle, her cheek pressed against the stock. Her body stretched long and still in the dirt, her breathing steady. The sniper crouched beside her, murmuring adjustments. "Half a mil right. Now lower by 2 clicks. Good. Hold your breath. Let the world stop moving around you." The crowd had grown larger. Soldiers leaned against vehicles, some standing on crates to get a better view. A few scoffed openly, betting bottles of whiskey she wouldn't come close. Others held their breath, unable to tear their eyes away. But for her, the world narrowed. The base, the soldiers, even the sniper beside her, they all faded until only 2 things remained: the rifle in her hands, and the distant shimmer of the steel plate nearly 2 miles away. Her finger hovered above the trigger. The sniper whispered, "Not yet. Wait for the wind to die. You'll know when." She inhaled, exhaled, then waited. Seconds passed, stretching into eternity. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she didn't move. She was stone, carved into the earth itself. And in that stillness, she felt it the moment of alignment. The air shifted, the heat shimmer straightened, and silence pressed down heavier than ever. Her finger tightened, but she didn't pull. Not yet. The weight of the challenge pressed down on her like gravity itself. One wrong move, one fraction of hesitation, and the shot would be wasted. The entire base was watching. Her silence had carried her this far, but if she failed now, it would be shattered into laughter and doubt. The sniper leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Now." Show me if I was wrong about you. Her eyes narrowed. Her body stilled. And for the first time in her life, she was about to prove that silence wasn't emptiness. It was power, compressed into a single trigger pull. The shot was postponed, not out of hesitation, but out of necessity. A sniper knew better than to let her waste the attempt on raw instinct. At 3,320 meters, instinct wasn't enough. Science, discipline, and repetition were the only things that mattered. If she was going to try, then she would do it properly. And so began the days that turned into weeks' days where she would be tested more fiercely than anyone imagined. At dawn, she was already at the range. Before the sun had risen high enough to bake the desert floor, she was prone in the dirt, rifle pressed against her shoulder, eyes fixed on targets that seemed impossibly small. The sniper stood beside her, notebook in hand, recording every shot, every adjustment, every failure. Failure came often at first. The first time she tried a 1,000-meter shot, her round struck the dirt 20 feet left of the target. Some soldiers watching laughed quietly, whispering that the silence in her corner had finally broken under pressure. But she didn't respond. She simply reloaded, adjusted, and fired again. The second attempt landed closer. The third, closer still. By the fourth, the sniper's pencil slowed as his eyes narrowed. She wasn't just guessing. She was learning. Training pushed her beyond the physical. The sniper drilled her relentlessly, not just in marksmanship, but in the science of long-range shooting. Every bullet is a story, he told her one morning, crouching beside her as she cleaned the chamber. It begins here, in the rifle, and ends out there. Everything in between the air, the wind, the heat, it all writes the pages. If you don't learn to read those pages, you'll never write the ending you want. She listened. She always listened. Soon she could predict the wind speed without instruments, simply by the way dust lifted off the desert floor or how a flag shifted on its pole. She could calculate bullet drop in her head, adjusting her aim with the faintest twist of the scope. She didn't complain when hours stretched into days, or when the sun beat down on her prone body until sweat stung her eyes. Patience was her weapon now. But training wasn't only technical, it was physical. The sniper forced her to carry heavy packs, to crawl across gravel until her elbows bled, to hold positions so long her body trembled with exhaustion. If you can't keep yourself still, he warned, and no calculation in the world will matter. Your heartbeat will betray you. So she learned to slow her pulse, to breathe in rhythms that matched the earth beneath her. Sometimes she practiced lying motionless for hours, her finger hovering near the trigger, waiting for the exact moment the world felt still. The soldiers began to notice. At first, they had mocked her, but as the days passed, their laughter faded into silence. They saw her rise before dawn, train until dusk, and return to her corner only to clean rifles as though they were sacred relics. Her discipline unnerved them. She was no longer a curiosity. She was becoming something else. A force. One evening, after a brutal day on the range, the sniper sat beside her as she dismantled the rifle yet again. His hands were dirty, his voice rough, but his eyes held a flicker of respect. "You don't stop?" he said, almost in disbelief. She didn't look up. "Neither do you." He gave a small laugh. "Maybe that's why I can't figure you out. Most people hit a wall. They break, or they make excuses. You just keep going." She finally raised her eyes, meeting his gaze with that same quiet steadiness. "I've been training for this all my life. I just didn't know it until now." For the first time, he didn't argue. He believed her. Days bled into weeks, and her progress became undeniable. What had once been wild shots now struck true. At 1,500 meters, she was consistent. At 2,000 meters, her accuracy surprised even the sniper. At 2,500 meters, the crowd that gathered to watch no longer laughed. They held their breath. The sniper himself grew more cautious. He had seen talent before, but this was different. She wasn't just learning, she was surpassing expectations. He began to realize that he was no longer training her to attempt the impossible. He was preparing her to achieve it. And yet, he knew there was one final barrier: her mind. One night, as the desert wind howled outside, he found her again in the weapons room, alone with the rifle. She was sitting cross-legged, her hands resting lightly on the disassembled parts, eyes closed as though in prayer. "You're not cleaning," he said softly. "No," she replied. "I'm listening." He frowned. "Listening?" "To the silence," she said. "It tells me when I'm ready." He didn't understand fully, but he didn't question it. Instead, he sat across from her. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We go for 3,000. Her eyes opened then, sharp and unblinking. She nodded once. The next morning, the base seemed to hold its breath. The target was set at 3,000 meters, a distance that reduced the steel plate to little more than a shimmering dot on the horizon. The sniper adjusted her scope, whispered the calculations, and stepped back. She lay prone, rifle steady, her body pressed into the earth. Her breathing slowed until it felt as if time itself had stilled. Around them, soldiers whispered nervously, waiting for her to fail. Her finger tightened. The rifle roared. Seconds passed, then clang. The steel plate rang out across the desert, a sound sharp and undeniable. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Some cursed, others cheered. But she didn't react. She reloaded, adjusted, and fired again. Another hit. Then another. The sniper's lips curved into a rare smile. He leaned down beside her and whispered, "You're ready." From that day, she was no longer just the quiet woman in the corner. She was a marksman, a challenger of limits, a symbol of patience turned into power. Soldiers who once mocked her now watched with respect, whispering of the legend that was forming before their eyes. But she didn't seek their praise. She didn't need their awe. Her focus remained on one thing: 3,320 meters. The shot that would silence doubt forever. And as the sniper walked beside her that evening, he knew the truth. He hadn't discovered her potential. He had merely uncovered what had always been there, waiting in the silence. She wasn't just training beyond limits. She was erasing them. The desert nights were colder than anyone expected. After days spent under a sun that scorched the skin, the sharp chill of darkness cut straight through the bones. Yet on those nights, when most soldiers sought the comfort of bunks and blankets, she remained outside, lying still under the stars with her rifle balanced across her lap. The sniper often found her there, motionless as a statue, her eyes tilted toward the sky, as though searching for something beyond the reach of men. At first, he thought it was just another part of her endless discipline, but over time, he realized it was more than that. She wasn't just training her body anymore. She was shaping her mind, tempering it into steel. One night he sat beside her, wrapping his jacket tighter around his shoulders. "You know," he murmured, "most people sleep when they get the chance." She didn't turn her head. "Sleep is easy. Focus is harder." He gave a short laugh, but there was no mockery in it. He had trained countless soldiers, watched countless egos crumble under the weight of failure, yet she was unlike any he had ever known. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was discipline. Her stillness wasn't laziness. It was control. "What do you think about when you sit here?" he asked. She lowered her eyes back to the rifle in her lap. Her fingers traced the metal as if it were alive. "Not about the shot," she said quietly. "About trust." That word startled him. He hadn't expected it. "Trust?" he echoed. She nodded. Every bullet, every trigger pull. It's trust. Trust in the weapon. Trust in the calculations. Trust in the person who trained you. Without it, there's only noise. The sniper fell silent. For the first time, he saw not just a trainee or a soldier before him, but a mind that understood the weight of their craft on a level most never reached. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened, not with laughter, not with idle chatter, but with something rarer, unspoken respect. He began to share stories he had never told anyone else. Stories of missions gone wrong, of shots taken at distances where doubt crept in like poison. Stories of comrades lost. One evening, he confessed, "I once missed a shot I should have made. Too much pride, not enough patience. I watched a friend pay the price." Her eyes, steady as always, didn't flinch at the admission. Instead, she placed a hand lightly on the rifle between them and said, "Then teach me not to make the same mistake." It was not pity she offered him, nor admiration. It was something far greater trust. And in that moment, he realized the truth. She was no longer just his student. She was his equal in spirit, if not yet in skill. The other soldiers noticed too. At first, their respect came grudgingly. They whispered less, laughed less, and soon they found themselves watching her the way they once watched him. Her training sessions drew crowds. Every bullet she fired became a quiet declaration that limits could be broken, that silence could speak louder than boasts. One afternoon, a younger recruit approached her after watching her land yet another impossible shot. He asked, nervously, "How do you stay so calm?" "I shake just lying behind the scope." She studied him for a long moment, then handed him her water canteen. "You don't fight the shake," she told him. "You learn to breathe with it. Make it part of you." The recruit looked stunned, as though she had handed him a secret worth more than gold. The sniper watched from the side, pride tugging at him. He had taught her technique, science, patience. But what she was giving back, the steady courage, the silent strength, was something only she could teach. Their trust was tested in small ways first. During one training session, a dust storm rolled suddenly across the desert, blotting out visibility. Most soldiers scrambled to shelter, but she stayed prone, sight fixed on a target she could no longer see. "Abort," he told her, kneeling beside her in the grit-filled wind. "You can't fire blind." She didn't move. The wind doesn't erase the target. It only hides it. Trust the math. Trust the rhythm. Against his better judgment, he watched her squeeze the trigger. The shot vanished into the storm, carried by winds so strong it seemed foolish to even try. But when the storm passed, and the steel plate echoed faintly in the distance, his doubts shattered with it. He laughed then, shaking his head. "You're insane." She finally allowed herself the ghost of a smile. "Or I just trusted." With every success, her legend grew. But legends are dangerous things. They attract both admiration and envy. Some soldiers muttered that she had been given unfair attention, that the sniper favored her over the rest. Others claimed she couldn't possibly make the long shot when the time came, that she was a fluke waiting to be exposed. She never answered them. Instead, she trained harder. If they came to watch, she let them. If they mocked her, she ignored them. Her silence was not submission, it was defiance. The sniper saw it, admired it, and defended her when needed. "You think she's favored?" He snapped at one critic. "Then outshoot her. Go on. Prove it." None of them ever could. By now, the sniper and the woman had developed an unspoken language. He could read the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes, and know what adjustment she was making before she touched the scope. She, in turn, could sense his doubts before he spoke them, answering questions he hadn't asked aloud. One night, While they sat in silence after a long day, he finally admitted what had been weighing on him. "You realize what this means, don't you?" he said softly. "If you make the shot, it won't just be a record. It'll be a story people tell long after we're gone." She looked at him steadily, as always. "I don't want to be a story. I want to be proof." "Proof of what?" "That the impossible isn't impossible. Just waiting for someone patient enough to try." The word struck him deeply. He had seen soldiers fight for glory, medals, recognition. She fought for something far more dangerous, the truth. As days melted into nights and back again, the bond between them became undeniable. It wasn't friendship in the usual sense, nor romance, nor duty. It was something rarer, trust. He trusted her to take his lessons and carry them further than he ever could. She trusted him to guide her into a world that few dared enter. Together, they formed a partnership that no storm, no whisper, no doubt could break. And though neither admitted it aloud, both knew that when the day of the shot came, it wouldn't just be her finger on the trigger. It would be theirs. Every lesson, every breath, every calculation, they had shared them all. And so, when the bullet finally flew across 3,320 meters of desert, it wouldn't just carry her name. It would carry both of theirs. The desert was quiet that morning, unnaturally so. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as though it too was waiting for what was about to unfold. The range had been cleared. The target, an unyielding steel plate, sat impossibly far away, 3,320 meters downrange. To the naked eye, it was a shimmer in the distance, little more than a mirage. Yet every soldier on base knew what it represented, the line between the possible and the impossible. She stood at the edge of the firing zone, her rifle in hand, the sun already rising high enough to sting her skin. Around her, men whispered, their voices carrying the unease of gamblers, about to watch someone bet everything on a single throw of dice. But she didn't hear them. Her mind was silent, her focus absolute. The sniper stood close, his expression unreadable. He had walked this path with her, step by step, lesson by lesson. Now, as the moment loomed, he found himself more anxious than she appeared to be. "You understand what's at stake?" he asked quietly, leaning in so no one else would hear. She gave the smallest nod. "It's not about the record." "Then what is it?" Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, steady and unwavering. "It's about proving that patience, trust, and silence are stronger than doubt." The sniper swallowed hard. He had taught her much, but the conviction in her voice told him one truth clearly. She no longer needed him to believe in her. She believed in herself. The preparation began. She lay prone, flattening her body against the hard-packed earth, adjusting the rifle until it aligned perfectly with her line of sight. Dust clung to her uniform, but she ignored it. Sweat gathered at her temples, but her breathing remained slow, deliberate. The sniper crouched beside her, notebook open, running through the math. Every variable was accounted for: wind speed, humidity, temperature, altitude. He called out adjustments, his voice low but firm. Winds moving 5 knots east. Guile 0.5 mil left. She adjusted silently. Heat shimmers strong. Bullets going to rise a fraction. Elevate 0.3. Another adjustment. To the crowd of soldiers watching from behind, the process seemed mechanical, almost tedious. But to those who understood, it was ritual. Every calculation was a prayer, every correction a vow. At 3,320 meters, there was no room for chance. Time seemed to slow as the final preparations settled into place. The sniper looked down at her, his voice dropping even lower. "This isn't just math anymore. It's patience. You'll have 10 seconds after you squeeze that trigger. 10 seconds where the world holds its breath with you. Don't fight it. Don't rush it. Just let the bullet write its story." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hands, steady as stone, gripped the rifle with the same quiet devotion she had shown since the very first day she picked it up. Her finger rested near the trigger, not pressing, not hesitating, simply waiting. The world around her blurred into silence. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her lungs sinking with the rhythm of the earth itself. This was the moment she had lived for. Behind them, the soldiers shifted uneasily. Some were skeptical, muttering that no one could possibly land a shot at this distance. Others, caught up in the tension, whispered prayers under their breath. But all of them, whether doubters or believers, stayed. No one wanted to miss the attempt. The sniper, though, ignored the crowd. His eyes were fixed on her, studying her breathing, the slight tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her gaze. He realized then that he was no longer her teacher. He was merely a witness. Minutes passed. She didn't rush. She didn't allow pressure to force her hand. She waited. The wind shifted slightly, tugging at the flag's downrange. Dust lifted, swirled, then settled again. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and reset her position with microscopic precision. "Wind's calming," the sniper whispered. She nodded once. The stillness stretched. 10 seconds turned into 20, then 30. Some of the soldiers murmured impatiently, wondering why she hadn't fired. But the sniper knew. She was waiting for the world to align, for that one perfect heartbeat where rifle, bullet, wind, and silence all became one. And when it came, she would know. Her memories flickered briefly as she stared down the scope. The first day, the sniper had asked her if she could make the shot. The laughter from the soldiers who didn't believe. The hours spent bleeding into gravel, the nights spent listening to silence. Every lesson, every bruise, every whisper of doubt, this was where it all led. She had trained beyond limits. She had learned trust. Now there was only the truth of the trigger. Her breathing steadied. Her finger curled slowly, patiently. The sniper held his breath. And then, crack, the rifle roared, shattering the stillness. The bullet tore into the desert air, invisible yet unstoppable. It began its long journey, arcing across the horizon. To the soldiers watching, those seconds stretched into eternity. Their eyes were glued to the distant steel plate, waiting for a sound they weren't sure would ever come. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. By the 4th second, some began to whisper. By the 6th, doubt crept in. By the 8th, silence tightened around them like a noose. And then, clang. The sharp, metallic ring echoed across the desert, faint but undeniable. The crowd erupted. Shouts, cheers, curses, disbelief, it all blended together into chaos. Some threw their hands in the air, others simply stared, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. She, however, didn't move. Her eyes remained on the scope. Her fingers slid calmly from the trigger. Without a word, she chambered another round. "Again," she whispered. The sniper's chest swelled with pride and disbelief all at once. He watched her reset, adjust, and fire once more. Seconds passed, stretching thinner than wire. Then another clang. The crowd's noise doubled, but she ignored it. She fired again. Another hit. Each impact rang like a drumbeat, each one louder than the last, each one shattering another piece of doubt. By the time she lowered the rifle at last, the desert was alive with voices. Soldiers who once mocked her now shouted her name. Those who doubted her now stared with wide-eyed awe. But she didn't bask in it. She didn't seek their approval. She simply rolled her shoulders, sat up, and whispered, "The shot isn't over. The story hasn't finished yet." The sniper crouched beside her, shaking his head with a grin. "You realize what you just did?" She glanced at him, her eyes calm as ever. "I did what I trained to do." "No," he said firmly. "You did what no one else could." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not pride, not triumph, something quieter. Peace, because she knew it was true. But deep down, she also knew the real challenge wasn't the steel plate at 3,320 meters. The real challenge was still ahead, the moment when the shot would matter, not just as a test, but in the field, where lives would hang in the balance. And she was ready. That morning would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. The day the silent woman from the weapons room silenced doubt itself with a single trigger pull. But to her, it was only a beginning. The true test was coming. And when it did, she would not hesitate. The bullet left the barrel with a thunderous crack, but in the stillness that followed, a sound seemed to vanish into eternity. All that remained was silence. 10 long seconds of it, as the round traveled across 3,320 meters of desert, slicing through invisible currents of wind and heat. To the soldiers standing behind her, those seconds felt like an eternity. They had seen her hit the plate already, but this was different. This wasn't just another test. This was the shot that would be remembered. Through the scope, the world seemed to slow. The horizon shimmered with heat, the target almost ghost-like, a phantom suspended at the edge of reality. She watched, not the bullet itself, too fast, too far, but the alignment, the stillness, the trust in every calculation she had made. She had done her part. Now the bullet was on its own. Her breath remained steady, her body pressed into the ground as though carved from stone. The sniper crouched at her side, counting silently in his head. 1, 2, 3, each number heavier than the last. By 6 seconds, whispers had started among the crowd. By 8, the air was thick with doubt. And then, clang. The sound was faint at first, distant as a memory, but it struck like thunder in their ears. The steel plate had been hit. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the world had frozen at the sound. Then the silence shattered. Cheers erupted from the soldiers, some shouting, some laughing, some simply shaking their heads in disbelief. The impossible had been done, right before their eyes. But she did not celebrate. She reloaded. The sniper's eyes widened as she chambered another round. "You've already proven it," he whispered. She didn't look at him. Once isn't proof. Consistency is. And with that, she fired again. The desert fell silent once more as the second bullet began its long, invisible journey. 9 seconds later, another clang. The crowd roared louder, their disbelief turning into awe. She fired again. And again. Each time, the seconds stretched thin, dragging every breath, every heartbeat, until the metallic ring of impact broke the tension. Each shot was a declaration not of arrogance, not of luck, but of mastery. 3 hits, 4, 5. The sniper's chest swelled with pride, his grin breaking through the hard lines of his face. He had seen her rise from a silent figure in the corner to something far greater, a force of precision, patience, and quiet defiance. The soldiers watching knew they were witnessing history, though none could fully grasp the weight of it. In that moment, under the burning desert sun, one woman had erased the boundary between possible and impossible. As the last shot rang true, she finally lowered her rifle. She did not smile. She did not raise her hands in triumph. She simply sat up slowly, brushing dust from her uniform, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, this was not spectacle. It was discipline. But to everyone else, it was a miracle. The sniper crouched beside her, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You've done what most would call impossible." She shook her head. "No, I did what was inevitable. The math was right. The patience was there. All I had to do was wait. He studied her carefully. There was no arrogance in her tone, no hunger for praise. Only calm certainty. It was then he understood why she had succeeded where so many others would have failed. She wasn't chasing glory. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was chasing the truth of the shot itself. The story spread across the base like wildfire. By the evening, soldiers who hadn't even been present swore they had seen it. The numbers grew with every telling. 3,320 meters became 3,400, then 3,500. The shot became legend before the sun even set. Somewhere in the mess hall, men raised their glasses in her name. Others scribbled in notebooks, recording every detail so they could retell it years later. She had become more than a soldier. She was a symbol. But symbols come with weight, and she felt it pressing down on her already. That night, under the stars, the sniper found her again. She was seated with the rifle across her knees, as she always was, her eyes turned upward into the endless black sky. "You know what they're saying about you?" he asked, sitting beside her. She didn't answer. "They're calling it the shot across time," he continued. "They're saying no one will ever match it. That you've done something eternal." Finally, she looked at him, her gaze calm, steady. Eternal is a dangerous word. Records are broken. Stories are exaggerated. Time erases everything. He frowned. "Then what do you think it means?" She glanced down at the rifle, running her fingers along the cold steel. "It means nothing if it never matters in the field." This was practice. Proof of skill. But the real shot, the one that matters, hasn't come yet. The sniper nodded slowly. He knew she was right. What she had done was extraordinary, yes. But the true test of a marksman wasn't distance or recognition. It was responsibility. One day, her skill would mean life or death. And she would be ready. As the camp settled into uneasy sleep, whispers of her shot drifted through the night like embers on the wind. The recruits who once mocked her now told tales of her focus, her silence, her patience. Veterans, hardened and skeptical, shook their heads in disbelief, but could not hide their respect. She had changed the air in the camp. She had bent the arc of what was possible. But she herself remained unchanged, quiet, patient, waiting, because she knew the truth. The shot across time wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning. The desert morning after the shot was quieter than usual. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the sand in brilliant gold and soft shadows, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge what had happened. The soldiers of the base moved about their routines, but there was an air of reverence. Conversations were hushed, glances lingered longer, and everywhere, the name of the quiet woman who had bent the impossible into reality was whispered with awe. She walked across the compound in her usual calm, her boots leaving soft prints in the dirt. She did not smile. She did not raise her head in triumph. To her, nothing had changed. The rifle in her hands was the same tool it had always been. The lesson, the practice, the patience, they remained as necessary as ever. But the world around her had changed. The sniper had joined her at the edge of the range, watching silently as she methodically cleaned her weapon. The sun caught in the scope's glass, scattering a fleeting prism of colors across her focused face. He shook his head slightly, unable to hide his astonishment. "They're calling it the impossible shot," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Impossible is just a word," she replied. "It only matters if someone believes it." He frowned. "Do you even realize what you've done? Soldiers from other units will hear about this. This will become a story people tell for years." She finally met his gaze, her eyes calm, unshakable. "Let them tell the story. I didn't make the shot for them. I made it for the rifle, for the training, for the discipline. The sniper nodded slowly, recognizing in her words the same principle that had driven him for decades. Pride and recognition were meaningless when it came to true skill. What mattered was control, mastery, and trust. Word of the shot spread rapidly. By noon, military communications buzzed with reports. Across the base, soldiers from different units approached her, offering handshakes, nods, and quiet congratulations. The younger recruits, once intimidated or dismissive, now stared at her with awe. They wanted to learn, to understand, to emulate the quiet power she wielded so effortlessly. Even hardened veterans approached, their initial skepticism replaced with respect. One grizzled sniper muttered under his breath, "I've trained all my life and never seen anything like that. She's something else." She received these gestures with modesty, acknowledging them with a nod, never with words. Her focus remained fixed on the rifle, on the process, on the craft. Fame and legend were irrelevant to her. Discipline was everything. In the following days, the sniper worked closely with her to document the shot. Calculations, environmental conditions, bullet trajectory, all were meticulously recorded. They analyzed each variable: wind, Coriolis effect, bullet drop, mirage distortion. The result was a masterclass in precision shooting that would be studied and referenced for years to come. But beyond the technical details, there was something more profound. The shot became a symbol of demonstration that patience, trust, and unwavering focus could achieve what others deemed impossible. It wasn't just a mark on a target. It was a proof of human potential when disciplined and cultivated. The soldiers around her began to change as well. Her quiet determination, her refusal to boast, her mastery of the impossible, it reshaped the culture on the base. Men and women began to adopt her ethos: focus before action, patience before pride, discipline before glory. The air became charged with respect, and for the first time in years, the soldiers felt inspired not by medals or titles, but by raw skill and dedication. One young recruit approached her one evening, holding a rifle with trembling hands. "Ma'am," he said, voice barely above a whisper, How do you stay so calm?" She looked at him, her expression serene. "You don't fight fear. You accept it. You breathe through it. You trust the process. Let every step, every calculation, every breath guide you. Then nothing can shake you." The recruit nodded slowly, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The sniper watched these interactions quietly, a subtle smile on his face. He realized then that her influence extended beyond her own feats. She had become a mentor, a quiet beacon for those who sought to achieve more than they believed possible. Where he had been a teacher of skill, she had become a teacher of discipline, trust, and patience. "She's changing everything," he whispered to himself one night as they stood together watching the sun set over the desert. She glanced at him briefly. "I'm not changing the world," she said softly. "I'm only showing what it can be if people choose to focus." And yet, in that simple truth, the world was changing. Weeks passed. The legend of the 3,320-meter shot spread beyond the base, whispered in mess halls, training centers, and barracks across the country. Military instructors used her example as a lesson in patience, discipline, and precision. Articles circulated describing the shot, the conditions, the training. Soon she became known as the soldier who could defy odds with a calm mind, steady hands, and an unshakable heart. But she never sought recognition. Her focus remained on the next challenge, the next target, the next level of mastery. To her, the shot was not an endpoint. It was proof that limits exist only until someone dares to push them. One evening, as she sat cleaning her rifle alone in the fading light, the sniper joined her once more. Silence settled between them, comfortable and deep. You know, he said after a long pause, you've left a mark far beyond the target. People will talk about this for years. Some will call it impossible, some will call it luck, and some will call it a miracle. She looked up from her work, her eyes calm and steady. None of that matters. A shot is just a shot. What matters is preparation, discipline, and trust. That's what lives beyond stories. He nodded, understanding finally what she had always known. Legends come and go. Steel corrodes. Words are forgotten. But skill, discipline, and trust they endure. And she had proven that they could endure beyond expectation, beyond doubt, beyond time itself. By the end of her rotation at the base, soldiers no longer whispered when she entered the room. They watched, silently and respectfully. Her presence demanded focus. Her discipline demanded attention. She had become a living lesson, a walking testament to the power of patience and mastery. And though she carried herself with the same quiet calm she had from the start, everyone around her knew this. She had done what few could ever dream, and in doing so, had changed the very air of the camp. The sniper stood beside her one final time before she departed, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "the shot you made. It's not just a number. It's proof of what one person can achieve with focus and trust." She smiled faintly, the first genuine smile since the challenge began. "Then I'll keep proving it." And with that, she walked away, leaving the desert and the legend she had forged behind her, though her impact would echo far longer than any gunshot. The shot across 3,320 meters was more than a record. It was a testament. Discipline, patience, and trust could rewrite what the world thought was impossible. And she had done it silently, calmly, perfectly.